Thanks for joining us as we wrap up another busy week of all things people, power, and politics. This is The Pulse. I'm Root Barrage. It has been a controversial first year for the second Trump administration. The president pushing the bounds of his power, and this weekend, people across the country are rallying against it. No Kings Rallies are being held across this nation, including right here in Metro Detroit. Katrina Mineta is one of the organizers. She's here with the message these rallies hope to send. And Oakland University history professor James Noss puts these in context with other demonstrations in our nation's history. And we are a little more than 2 weeks out now from the Detroit mayoral election. And while that's the only city they're in charge of, the impact of this race is actually far-ranging. Yes, you should care in the suburbs. We're talking with Troy Mayor Ethan Baker and Martin Manna of the Chaldean Chamber about the impact Motor City politics has on the entire state of Michigan and really arguably the country. Well, we begin with the war between Russia and Ukraine. Just a day after President Trump had a call with Russian President Vladimir Putin, he welcomed Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky to the White House. And an about-face by President Trump saying he's now hesitant to send long-range Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine just days after saying he was seriously weighing in to do just that. Now, during the conversation, the president says he feels Putin wants to end the war, but Zelensky, well, he isn't so sure.
I think that President Putin wants to end the war, or I wouldn't be talking this way. I think he wants to end the war. I spoke to him yesterday for 2.5 hours. We went through a lot of details. He wants to get it ended. I think that President Zelensky wants to get it ended. Now we have to get it done.
We want peace. Putin doesn't want. That's why we need pressure on him. We will speak with President today what we need. We understand what we need to push Putin to negotiation table. And as I said previously, so we are ready to speak in any kind of format, bilateral, trilateral, doesn't matter, just peace. This is important. And we don't speak about.
After the meeting, President Trump went on his Truth social media page calling on Moscow to stop where they are and end the war. It's been going on more for 3 years after Russia's February 2022 invasion of Ukraine. That's just scratching the surface, so let's pick up the pace and run through some of the other big stories we're covering right now. We'll begin here. The U.S. took survivors of a military strike in the Caribbean into custody. Yesterday's was the first strike that anyone survived since President Trump started launching attacks on suspected drug smuggling boats last month. The president confirmed the attack while hosting Zelensky. At least 28 have died in these strikes so far. President Trump has said the U.S. is in armed conflict with drug cartels, using the same legal authority the Bush administration used when declaring the war on terror. The president's move has upset some lawmakers on both sides in Congress, since Congress has the power to declare war. Former National Security Advisor John Bolton pleads not guilty to charges of mishandling classified information. The Justice Department accusing Bolton of emailing classified information to family members and keeping top secret documents at his house. Bolton was released from custody. The case comes amid growing fears the Trump administration is using the DOJ to go after his enemies. Bolton has indicated he will make the case his prosecution is politically motivated. He served as national security advisor in President Trump's first term and has been a critic of President Trump since leaving the job. To the Supreme Court now, where the Trump administration is asking justices to allow deployment of National Guard troops to the Chicago area. It comes after a judge delayed the deployment for at least 2 weeks. That judge said there's no substantial element that there's a danger of rebellion during Trump's immigration crackdown in the Windy City. But the Solicitor General argues that order steps on Trump's authority and endangers federal personnel and property. You know, it's moves just like that and other ways the Trump administration has tested the limits of his power that are now prompting thousands of No Kings rallies across the country, including right here in Michigan. One of the organizers joining us next with her message. And Oakland University history professor James Noss looks at this, along with other rallies in our nation's history. You're watching The Pulse on Fox 2. Back now on The Pulse, looking at all things people, power, and politics. Welcome back. Here to talk about the No Kings rallies happening across our area and really across the country. Macomb Defenders Rising co-founder Katrina Mineta and Oakland University history professor James Noss. We thank you both for joining us here on The Pulse tonight. And Katrina, you're one of the people who's helping spearhead some of these No Kings rallies, really a grassroots effort across the country. If you had to tell someone in an elevator, a 15-second pitch, why is this important, do you think, to do?
Yeah, so right now we see that Donald Trump is acting lawlessly. He thinks that he can rule like a king. But since 1776 in America, we have done no kings. And so that's the message that we're hoping to send this weekend.
Do you think President Trump, just from your both deep and casual observations, does this affect him in a way? I know he cares about public perception a lot. He watches television. He watches polls. Is that part of the hope, is that he sees this?
Well, I think it has more to do with, there's a lot of people and institutions that capitulate to Trump. They want to make a deal. And our goal with this protest is to show them that there will be public backlash for those deals that take away our rights, that take away the things that matter to Americans.
And there are, of course, as we know, federal courts and attorneys general across the country. And in cases of election issues, secretaries of state that are speaking up and talking about this. We'll talk more about this in a second with you, Katrina. Professor Noss, I find your historic perspective fascinating because we tend to, in our Instagram world, think in snapshots and not in terms of historic context. But you'd argue that this is stuff that's been happening for a really darn long time now.
I would, yeah. I mean, to Katrina's point, she says 1776. She's right, but I would go back further and say this is baked into the history of republics as a form of government. Famously, the Romans got rid of a king in 509 BCE, so quite a ways before 1776, probably mythologically so.
Before Instagram.
Yeah, before Instagram, slightly. Well, they were carving it in stone tablets at the time,
sure,
but it took a while. Yeah,
different.
Indeed. But nonetheless, it's probably a legendary story, but nonetheless, they celebrated the idea that no king, and the worst insult you could give a Roman to some extent was you're becoming a king. You saw that. They assassinated Julius Caesar precisely for becoming a king. Fast forward a little bit to the person who made Julius Caesar famous, Shakespeare, writing in Elizabethan England, talking about the assassination of Julius Caesar as a not so veiled conversation about, sort of the monarch of Elizabeth I and tyranny. And then our own founders in 1776 writing about Romans and not wanting to be Romans. In fact, when they overthrow King George, they say, we're not going to have another Tarquin, who was the last Roman king. So it's been going on for a while. Yeah.
But there are the very pieces and parts of the Constitution that kind of herald back to that time and honor that tradition that are codified in our Constitution that are being challenged right now, wouldn't you say?
I would. I mean, I think one thing to keep in mind with the republic as a form of government is we tend to think whatever we're going through is a new thing, and because it is new to us in very many ways. But republics are not set in stone, as it were, no Roman pun intended, but republics need to be redefined with every generation. And so there's this constant conversation about how much power do you have to give to a president to rule effectively, because we want a president to be able to rule effectively, but what's too much power? So we've had this conversation lots of times. Andrew Jackson famously was called, I think, King Andrew I. They called FDR a king. They called Nixon a king. They called, in my lifetime, second George Bush the king, War Powers Act, and
sure,
whatnot. So it's a pretty common moniker.
Yeah, history on your side does give you a bit of perhaps some relief in knowing that we've been through roads like this before, but also a little bit of context. I know on an international front, there's been talk of, at the time in the 80s, Indira Gandhi, the Prime Minister of India, who her powers were being questioned because they thought she was going a little too far. Katrina, let's bring it back home, though. In this age of social media and TikTok, what changes with No King's Day? What is the effect? How is it a greater multiplier because of the very tools that we have in our palms?
Yeah, well, when people see that millions of Americans are gathering together to stand up to the administration, it builds moral courage. It builds a unified movement where people want to get involved, want to be civically engaged, and it makes us stronger because this country is about the people having the power, and that's where power should always belong.
Have you heard from people who are Latin American descent, or people who may be here on student visas and others who are worried about going out to protests like this because they're afraid they'll be picked up?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's part of the reason that we are protesting is because we're seeing unmasked agents kidnap Americans off the streets of America. Right now, we have Migro Watch in Detroit So we have the institutions there to make sure that people's rights are being respected. Of course, we can't guarantee it, but it is a concern of people.
Are there people who are saying, I'm willing to take a risk and go out there because this is the very reason that we're out here, right?
Exactly, absolutely. And I think that's very courageous of them to do so. We need people to stand up right now. Otherwise, all of this gets taken away from us.
In the 2.5 minutes we have left on this program, on this segment, I wanted to ask you about guardrails, both of you. And if you could just reflect for a moment on the guardrails that are in place. So you have the attorneys general, you have federal courts. Does it bring you any relief or any confidence in our system, Katrina, when you see how many federal courts have laid down the law?
It does. It does give me hope. It gives me hope that we'll see millions of Americans. This No Kings Rally is happening in 100 locations in Michigan alone and 2,700 across the nation. So that all gives me hope that Americans will stand up, our courts will, stand up, and that we'll do the right thing as we always have.
And Professor Nas, you agreed to come on the program and talk about history, but just based on what you're seeing right now in our current history that's being written, the guardrails are in place and you see them working, yes?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what Katrina says is true. You're seeing attorneys general, you're seeing courts step in, but I would also add that, our founders intended another guardrail, which I think we take for granted, which is very much the people. I mean, they intended a well-educated citizenry to stand up and check power when they felt like that had to happen. It's happened to both sides of the political aisle multiple times in the history. And so I think although people, whatever their political color is right now, may feel nervous, I think they should actually see this and this movement as a sign that the Republic is working as it was supposed to work.
And codified in that Republic, in the papers, of course, the First Amendment and the freedom of the press. And so many people talking about what happened at the Pentagon with Fox News, Newsmax, and others joining CNN and MSNBC saying, we're not going to agree to these rules. I think one thing to keep in mind, if you don't mind, indulge me for a second, if you're a Republican who's watching this and you're saying, I can't believe all of these Democrats are trying to stop our president from doing things, we should remind you that when the pendulum swings the other way and we have a Democratic president in office, we should also be guarded against his or her powers too. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. I think that's the point, right? We have a First Amendment for a reason.
Yeah, I mean, when I was here last, we were talking about free speech, and we were talking particularly about Ted Cruz being a conservative voice who was defending, I think it was in that case, ABC's right with Jimmy Kimmel, and on the grounds that we're not going to be in power forever, and in a couple of years, the pendulum's going to swing the other way, and you need to adhere to principles, not what makes the most sense for you that day.
What feels good today may be very different tomorrow, depending on who's in power.
It will be likely,
and
right?
it will be very much so, and we've seen it already. Real quickly, we did reach out to the White House and ask them what their thoughts are about Katrina's events and the No Kings Day events that are happening all throughout this country and here in Michigan. We did get a comment from Abigail Jackson, the White House Deputy Press Secretary, and her statement was sent to Fox 2 saying, my statement is, who cares? That is where we are with this country and the strife that you see from the White House to the people on the ground on different ends of the political spectrum. So here we are. We'll let you make up your mind about what you think about all of this, but we want to thank Katrina and thank Professor Nas for joining us here. Be safe. Good luck out there tomorrow. Thank you. The Detroit mayoral election just 2 weeks away. But if you don't live in Detroit, you might be asking, who cares? Well, I'll tell you why you should care after the break. You're watching The Pulse on Fox 2. It is People, Power, and Politics. Welcome back to Detroit's only nightly political talk show, The Pulse. Here to talk about the Detroit mayoral race and its impact on the entire state, Troy Mayor Ethan Baker and Chaldean American Chamber of Commerce President Martin Manna. It's good to see you both. Thanks for joining us here today on The Pulse. Full disclosure, I asked Martin to come on the show tonight because I was actually speaking at an event today where I interviewed both the mayoral candidates in Detroit, Mary Sheffield and Pastor Kinlock, at the Chaldean Chamber event. They do this yearly where they bring in candidates. Here's a look at some of what happened on stage today. You believe that there are two Detroits, a tale of two cities when it comes to downtown and the neighborhoods?
I believe that there is no doubt that there's a lot of areas in Detroit, in neighborhoods that have felt neglected. And Detroit, as I've campaigned this last year, and I've been around Detroit a lot, but Detroit is a large city. It is extremely big, and it's going to take time to get everywhere. But I do think that the next mayor has to be very intentional, that the next economic agenda and strategy is neighborhoods first. We want to drive growth in our commercial corridors, making sure that we're activating those, bringing amenities, retails back into our commercial corridors, and also prioritizing our Detroit base and small businesses to have access to develop our neighborhoods.
I grew up in Detroit on the west side. I grew up in poverty, no running water, no windows, no doors up to the house. I know what it feels like in a city to be a child and a part of a family where everyone is suggesting that the city is coming back, but it has not made it to your street. It hasn't found opportunities knocking on your door. And that's why for the last 27 years, I've used my platform not as a pedestal to lift myself, but lift an entire community of people. At the end of the day, no one is saying that there are not good things going on in Detroit, that Detroit has not done great things. What we're suggesting and what the community is saying and demanding is that we need to do more.
All right, there's a look at these two candidates, both very impressive people with impressive backgrounds, albeit very different backgrounds. I want to start with you, Martin, just a little bit about your thoughts on what you saw today. You're not someone who lives in the city of Detroit, but you invited these two candidates because you know they're important in the region. We'll get to that in a minute, but what did you think about both of them today?
Well, I want to just say that we've come such a long way in the city of Detroit. I mean, this used to be the laughingstock of the nation. And there's been quite a resurgence, renaissance in the city. And for the first time, as long as I've been alive, people are talking about coming to Detroit, touring the city, coming and enjoying what's part of this region, and Detroit's a big part of that. I don't think we could go wrong with either one of these candidates if they're elected. I mean, there was a contrast in maybe the presentation, but Reverend Pastor Kinloch was really focused on neighborhoods, which might resonate with a lot of the voters who maybe felt left out. But, you know, the Councilwoman, Council President Mary Sheffield's really focused on continuing, you know, what's already been developed in the city of Detroit and making sure that it's one city that has collaboration, inclusive, and friendly to business. And that's what I took from the event today.
Troy Mayor Ethan Baker. We'll get to why everyone should care in a minute, because this show does air, by the way, in Grand Rapids and Lansing and streams all over the country. But I want to ask you about your thoughts on this whole issue that has always divided the very races that we're talking about. Neighborhoods, I hate to say it, versus downtown. Yeah. How important is that contrast, do you think, that you heard the pastor make there about down home in the neighborhood?
Yeah, well, I wasn't at the event today, but just watching the two clips I just saw, he was very compelling. It was a very compelling answer, and I think it could really resonate with a lot of voters in Detroit. The trick, of course, is getting the voters to see that message if you're Pastor Kinloch and letting them hear you, and that's always a struggle in any campaign. But very compelling, and Council President Sheffield also she's a great speaker. She's always very compelling too, and I think they're both tapping into what the residents of Detroit need to hear. We all know downtown Detroit is doing really, really well. We've seen so much development. We've seen so much activity happen down there. A lot of money poured in. It's doing great things for a good portion of the city. But those neighborhoods matter. And you know, when you're a mayor, you represent the entire city, not just the businesses downtown, but the grandma and the grandpa who live on the outskirts of the city who need the ambulance to come when they call 911.
You know, I know that a lot of people call you because you're a well-respected politician in this town. But when you see something like this happen with fewer than 3 weeks left until Election Day, no one should take anything for granted. Isn't that something we learned in 2016? Yeah. Like, no one should just say this is a shoo-in for anybody, because you don't know who's going to show up. That's the most important thing, right?
Right. And, you know, people are already voting now. Absentee ballots have been out, and it's about turnout. These off-year elections, even in a bigger city like Detroit, the question is, who is voting? How are they really getting people to the polls? But things can change. 2.5 weeks left. Things can move really fast. And if you get a groundswell of support, all of a sudden word gets out that you're the candidate for neighborhoods. You're the one. I mean, that can get people to the polls and say, you know what? That's who I'm going to support.
And because of Martin's event today, the things that were said on stage were written about in the Detroit News, Detroit Free Press, and elsewhere. Martin, why should someone who's watching on the other side of that phone or that camera, who's watching from Grand Rapids or Lansing or heck, Taylor or Troy or Allen Park, why should they care about who's mayor of the city of Detroit, in your eyes, as a business leader?
Well, I think you look at the state of affairs here in Michigan, and we're losing relevance. Our population's declining. And there's also a brain drain. A lot of our students are graduating from college and then leaving the state. They want viable cities. They want to live in environments that are conducive to, you know, walkability, cultural events, and that's what we have in the city of Detroit. When we're out in the neighborhoods, or we're out of town or in another country, we never talk about Michigan. We talk that we're Detroiters. A lot of us were born in the city, and we need a vibrant city. And then it creates this wonderful metropolitan area. So it's very important as we lose influence on a federal level because we're declining population. We need the city of Detroit and its resurgence to continue to attract people.
I find
and
it funny.
businesses.
It's funny because I grew up in Troy. It was brought up there, and I remember when we'd go out of the state, people would say, "Where are you from?" I'd say Troy, and they go, "Detroit?" They almost thought that you were trying to say Detroit and stopped halfway. Troy depends on Detroit, yes? I mean, we all depend on Detroit to do well.
And to that point, when every time I introduce myself as the mayor of Troy and people don't know, they think I'm telling them I'm the mayor of Detroit. So that still happens.
Same thing, yeah.
But no, the truth is we depend on the city of Detroit. And I think actually Detroit depends on its suburbs now too. But a couple decades ago, it was really popular to say, you know what? The suburbs will do really well. It doesn't matter what Detroit's doing. That whole mindset's changed. We're deeply intertwined. It
What's
really
changed?
matters. You know what? I think that just first of all, the mindset's changed, and that whole attitude towards we want Detroit to do well, so we do well. That starts with the individual leaders, and if they're thinking that, it happens. But I think it's really important for everybody throughout the state to understand that, like it or not, what people think of Michigan depends on how Detroit is doing. Because most people outside of the state, they really only think of Michigan as the city of Detroit. So we want Detroit to do well because that's what's going to bring interest and people and dollars back into our state.
Even if someone doesn't like Mayor Mike Duggan personally for whatever reason, they cannot deny the last 12 years and the success and the trajectory of the city of Detroit. So Martin Manna, safe to say for 12 years, people, an entire bank of voters have essentially said, well, we know what we're doing here. And now there's a crossroads. Talk about that for a moment.
Well, I think we should give credit to Mayor Duggan. He's kind of put a big wrench into this upcoming gubernatorial race because of his success, really, more than anything. And he ran on making sure that he'll stop the decline of population in the city of Detroit, and he's finally starting to reverse that. What we don't have in the city of Detroit, thank God, is what took place. So Mayor Duggan and Council President Sheffield really started this work relationship, this collaboration. It used to be the city council versus the mayor, and that really did not bode well for anybody in the city. I think people have learned from that. We need collaboration, whether it's with city council and whoever's elected, and also with the surrounding cities and suburbs. I mean, it's important that we start thinking like a region rather than Republicans or Democrats. Most people are in the center, either center right or center left, and we got to always get in the middle. We need compromise and collaboration.
Those are two very important C's that go along with the success of any great region and city, and we hope people will follow that who are running for office. Martin, first time on the Pulse. Good to see you. Come back again.
Come on.
Yeah, come on. Let's do it again.
I mislet it rip.
Ethan Baker.
Sorry.
You know what? You don't have to yell. You don't have to yell at each other. Collaboration.
You want to let it rip, Martin? Let's do it.
Collaboration.
I'm always ready.
Ethan Baker, thank you for your time as well. We appreciate you both. That is the Pulse for tonight. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Rup Raj. As always, it was great to be with you.